Episode 9 is a great episode, but a few shortcomings bother me enough to knock a 5-star episode down to 4. First up, what happened to Pav and Peace? A big problem I had was that when we consider episode 9 as a finale to last week's episode 8, there are major shortcomings. I'm not sure I'd even consider it a conclusion to a 2-part storyline. For example, last week we learned of Pavo, that its inhabitants are inherently peaceful, and they can and do transfer peace and balance to other beings. We saw this happen to Saru, although with pretty bad consequences. The point is, the Pavans go out of their way to broker peace when they can. Or so we thought. At the end of last week's episode, the Pavans send an invitation to the Klingons with their goal of being to broker some kind of peace between Klingons and the Federation. In this week's episode, all that story buildup is essentially ignored. None of the Pavans' stories seem to matter because in episode 9 it wasn't even addressed, at all. Sure, the Klingons arrive, want to destroy the planet Pavo and engage in battle with the Federation, but I was waiting throughout the entire episode for the Pavan peacemaking storyline to come up, and it never did. So I'm not exactly sure why the show's writers even bothered with all the world building they did surrounding Pavo's life forms, or going anywhere near as in-depth as they went. It seemed unnecessary. Speaking of detail in the Pavo, episode 9 gave us nothing to help understand the transmitter from last week's episode. All we know is it's a naturally occurring transmitter of some type, but we have no idea what type of transmission it emits. It doesn't tell us how that can in any way be used to break Klingon cloaks, or why it was even the purpose of last week's away mission, since the Pavan transmitter is never used. I suppose it could be assumed that Starfleet never gets the go-ahead from the Pavans, and so it's a moot point anyways, but whether that's true or not is completely unclear as it's never addressed in this episode. We're simply left with yet another loose end in this series. Unless I missed something big somehow after a few viewings, Into the Forest to Go pretty much makes last week's episode irrelevant. Okay, so those are my views on episode 9. There's a few other things that aren't necessarily just about episode 9, but I think I should mention anyways. At the start of the episode, we see Vulcan Admiral Terrell directing Captain Lorca to essentially cut and run, which means leaving the Pavans to certain death by Klingons. That decision is essentially placing value of Starfleet lives over Pavan life. It's very un-Trek-like, so I can only assume that Discovery must be taking place prior to the implementation of the Prime Directive. The order makes me wonder who's in charge of running Starfleet and what Starfleet's premise is at this point in Star Trek history. Tangentially, the Vulcans have all around been bugging me. Again, it's not specifically an issue I have with this episode alone, but whenever the Vulcan Admiral Terrell is on screen, he appears angry. Rather than cool, collected, and logical like Vulcans are supposed to be, okay, with the possible exception of Pon farr, both he and Sarek come across as pissed off at all times. Ultimately, this didn't detract from the episode overall, but it is something irksome for a longtime Star Trek fan. So there you have it. Do you agree with us? Disagree? Be sure to comment either below or at ncc-1031.com. And be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel for other Star Trek Discovery news, opinions, and reviews. Until next time, peace and long life.